Good morning, super sparkly sapphires. It's Wednesday, so it's time for Agenda on Gaga's deck. Today is Wednesday, April 15th, 2020. We'll begin with Mindful Minute like always, so find a comfy position in 5, 4, 3, 2, wonderful. Today is the 135th day of school. How do we write 135? 100, 3 tens, and 5 ones. 135. 100, 110, 120, 130, 131, 132, 133, 134, 135. On Wednesdays, we count by 8s, 9s, and 10s. Ready? Starting on 8. 8, 16, 24, 32. So if you're at 32, how do you add 8 more? Maybe you know that 2 plus 8 more is 10. So if you're at 32 and you add 8 more, you just go to the next 10 after 30, which is 40. And what's 8 more than 40? I hope you said 48. Because 40 plus 8 is 48. 48, counting by 9s is my favorite. Starting on 9, 9, 18, 27, 36, 45, 54, 63, 72, and 81. When you count by 10s, you start with 10. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Remember, you don't have to start at 10 when you're counting by 10s. If you start at 6, you just go straight down the same way. 10 more is 16, 10 more is 26, 36, 46, 56, and we'll stop at 66. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Yesterday, we read about pilgrims, and I want to know, if you lived in the 1600s, would you leave England and sail across the Atlantic Ocean for 2 months to get to America to find freedom and lots of open land? Would you take that risk? Would you leave England and sail to America? So far for U.S. history, we have talked about the Native Americans and how 500, 600,000 years ago, only Native Americans lived here. And then we read about people called pilgrims who came on a ship from England and started living here about 400 years ago. Over 100 years after pilgrims and other people from England started coming to America, thousands more people came from Europe, and there were many, many people living in America on the East Coast. And there were so many people that the land was broken into 13 areas that were called colonies, and they were sort of like states. So at this point, England was still in charge of all the people in America, and the King of England ruled them. But a lot of people in America didn't like that, and they wanted to have their own government and their own country. So this story tells about the beginning of a war called the Revolutionary War or the American Revolution. And this is the war that we ended up winning to allow us to be our own country, to form the country, the United States of America. The story is called Paul Revere's Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, illustrated by Ted Rand. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, that's the year 1775, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, "If the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church tower as a signal light. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea." Remember that. That's a very important part of the story. 1 light if the British are coming on land, 2 lights if the British are coming by sea or across the river. "And I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm." And to arm means to get their weapons ready to fight. Then he said, "Good night," and with muffled oar silently rowed to the Charleston shore. Just as the moon rose over the bay, where swinging wide at her moorings lay the Somerset, British man of war, a phantom ship with each mast and spar, across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. So this is where the British were staying, and this is some of them rowing across the river. Meanwhile, his friend, through alley and street, wanders and watches with eager ears, till in the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the barrack door. So here are the British soldiers, the redcoats, trying to find the weapons. And the measured tread of the grenadiers marching down to their boats on the shore. So here come the British. Then he climbed to the tower of the Old North Church by the wooden stairs with steady tread to the belfry chamber overhead, and startled the pigeons from their perch on the somber rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade, by the trembling ladder steep and tall to the highest window in the wall, where he paused to listen and look down a moment on the roofs of the town, and the moonlight flowing over all. Beneath in the churchyard lay the dead in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear like a sentinel's tread the watchful night wind as it went, creeping along from tent to tent, and seeming to whisper, "All is well." A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. For suddenly all his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats. So here's more British coming ashore in their boats. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed at the landscape far and near, then impetuous stamped the earth, he was really eager to go, and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the Old North Church. Remember, he's watching the church across the water to see if there's 1 lamp or 2 lamps being lit. The belfry tower of the Old North Church, as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and somber and still. And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full on his sight A second lamp in the belfry burns. Here's a really close-up of the tower, and there's the two little lights in the church tower. Do you remember what that means? One if by land and two if by sea. So now his friend has told him that the British are coming across the water, and Paul Revere is gonna go ride around and spread the word and get ready for a battle. A hurry of hoofs in a village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles in passing a spark, struck out by a steed, flying fearless and fleet. That was all, and yet through the gloom and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night. And the spark struck out by that steed in his flight kindled the land into flame with its heat. So Paul Revere and his horse are about to start something that's going to change U.S. history forever. He has left the village and mounted the steep, and beneath him, tranquil, broad, and deep, is the mystic meeting the ocean tides. And under the alders that skirt its edge, now soft on the sand, now loud on the ledge, is heard the tramp of his steed as he rides. It was 12 by the village clock when he crossed the bridge into Medford town. He heard the crowing of the rooster and the barking of the farmer's dog, and felt the damp of the river fog that rises after the sun goes down. It was 1 by the village clock, so it's 1 in the morning, in the middle of the night, when he galloped into Lexington. He saw the gilded weathercock swim in the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting house windows, blank and bare, gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. So he knows there's going to be fighting and blood and dying. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Concord town. He heard the bleating of the flock, that's the sheep, and the twitter of birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadows brown. And one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. Those are like the bullets that came out of their guns, called muskets, that the British had. You know the rest in the books you have read, how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball from behind each fence and farmyard wall. So that means that when the British started attacking, everybody in America that wanted to have their own country fought right back, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again, under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So here's the redcoats, the British, and they're being chased away by the patriots or the colonists or the people who are going to become American very soon. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For borne on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will awaken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. So for literature response today, I want you to tell me about Paul Revere. What did he and the other patriots want? And what did the British want? And why were they fighting? What was Paul Revere's message to all the people in Boston? What was he telling them to get ready to do? Why did the Patriots want to have their own country and not be part of England anymore? Maybe you'll talk about the lights in the church tower, telling Paul Revere if the British were going to come by land or by sea. Have your grown-up send me a picture of your literature response. I'd love to see it.